son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, welcome back. It is once again the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As always, please like and subscribe. Those things really help out the channel. I am incredibly excited for our guest today. We have a true tour guide that's going to take us through the labyrinth of creativity. Curator of Creative Codex, please welcome to the show, MJ Dorian.
Yes. Hello. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, James. Thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure and really looking forward to what conversations we're going to be having. So thank you again.
Thank you for doing this. I reached out to you straight out of the cold. Another guest, Ryan Ratto, told me to reach out to you after I had him on the show. So shout out Ryan Ratto and thank you for that suggestion. And thank you for being open to doing this. I know this is... You were like, yeah, sure. What are we going to talk about? And I was trying to explain we were texting yesterday and I was like, well, there's a lot of overlap in what you do. And in fact, when Ryan put me onto your channel, I'm not even joking. I watched all of them. I just watched all the videos. And just so this link will of course be in the description, but this is the Creative Codex YouTube page. I will also include the other links if you want to do audio instead. But you do a really exciting job of exploring not only artists who are creative and their experiences and the stories that help shape their art, but other people who are influential in the greater artistic mindset or the evolution of the artistic mindset over the course of the last, over the course of human history. So if you just want to like kind of give yourself a quick intro, what you do, and then we'll get into like why you started doing it.
Yeah, sure. So, the YouTube side of it is actually rather young because I initially started the show just called Creative Codex as a podcast 7 years ago now. So it's 7 years going strong. And the entire premise and kind of guiding spirit of it is this deep and humanistic investigation of creative genius and the creative geniuses that have lived and changed the world and society through their work, through their efforts, through their influence. And it's just it's been a long held fascination of mine, and I'm continually inspired and gracious for the fact that there are other people out there who really dig learning about this stuff too. So yeah. It's one of my passions.
So you've been doing this for 7 years. What made you want to start? Because it takes a certain level of crazy to want to start doing a podcast or releasing videos. It's an extra layer of stress and anxiety that you have to be a little bit crazy to choose to pursue. So I'm wondering like what in your life led up to where you're like, okay, well now I have to document this. I have to fleshing these ideas out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the crazy is one of the main ingredients in the formula is a desperate and deep-seated need for validation.
Love that. Yep. Stunning self-awareness. Love that.
that propels one toward a life of podcasting. But also the arts in general. There's no great artist who isn't, messed up in the head in some form and desperate for validation.
Absolutely.
In some way that drives you toward being in the public eye more. A lot of these kinds of figures, they're not shying away from their work being in the public, despite that they're still taking a lot of risks that put them in various degrees of danger, you could say, existential danger. But in any case, yeah, it started honestly early on when I was starting to get engaged by music as a teenager in high school. The three figures that really captured my imagination, and then they still mystify me, are Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, and Salvador Dalí. And so I was into both music and art, and very much still have my hands in both these pots. But yeah, Kurt Cobain, just from the intense emotionality of his work, his melodies, the way that he's able to communicate like deep existential, with otherwise philosophical kind of things, but in an emotional way, and hit you no matter what age you are. Then Jimi Hendrix, just his pure virtuosic kind of mind expanding ability that to this day as a guitarist I'm just marveling at anytime I pick up a Hendrix song. And then of course, yeah, Salvador Dali in terms of the visual side, just what the hell, like what are we doing here? Why? How does it get to this point? What are the incremental steps that get you to being Salvador Dali and being able to think in this way? And, you could, of course, give some credit to this group that he was part of, the Surrealists in their early years and whatnot. But, I mean, you got to give the man credit where credit is due. A lot of it is coming from him. And so those early kind of like feelings of awe toward these figures put me on the track of being like, okay, well, why do these people come about? Why can't everybody be like this? Are we not trying hard enough? What's going on here? Is it DNA? Is it environment? Is it the fact that, without a doubt, they all practiced their asses off and put in, their supposed 10,000 hours into their crafts? So that propelled me early on toward wanting to read their biographies, let's say. Initially, that was the impetus. But to this point, 7 years ago, starting a show specifically about an investigation of creative genius, and trying to, feel our way through the darkness of understanding what's going on here.
I love that. Dalí, I'm going to second that. Dalí, for sure. That was, getting into the art of Dalí was probably the first point in my life as a young teenager where I was like, seeing the overlap before that, they were just different disciplines, music, and art, and all the subdivisions of the activities. And Dalí was the first artist that really made me start thinking in terms of like, what if my band wrote songs that were like a painting? You know what I mean?
Right.
And certainly Dalí, I don't know if you know the band Dredge. Do you know the band Dredge?
It's possible. I'm not off the top of my head.
They were early 2000s. They kind of got lumped into nu metal, but they weren't nu metal at all. They did a concept record that was based around the Temptation of St. Anthony, famous Dalí painting, and the whole record is like has the themes of these things. And again, it just like made me start thinking, what is the art, the artistic mind, the creative mind that's not restricted to a discipline. It applies everywhere. And a lot of these people that we talk about, Kurt Cobain did art, visual art. Mm-hmm. Sure. That was another thing he loved to do, so, and Hendrix loved to do drugs, but, Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, so did Kurt. Yeah, right, exactly.
And Salvador Dali famously said he didn't do drugs, he was drugs.
Yeah, right. Well, what is your read on that? Yeah, he famously was like, I don't take drugs to inspire these things, but after a deeper analysis of him as an artist, do you think he was on drugs, or do you think he was just so wired creatively or so wired to express himself that he was his own drug? He was getting his own high off the creation.
I mean, when he says something like that, you have to take it with some grain of salt, because this is like a narcissist to the extreme level.
Sure.
And he like became a caricature of himself in the latter half of his life, a caricature of like this creative genius archetype. And so anything he says is always like with a feeling of machismo, and like with like one-upping whatever everybody else is doing. So if everybody else during the 60s or 70s was taking drugs and people were like, hey, Dalí, it looks like maybe you're taking drugs too, he'd be like, I don't need drugs. I am drugs. So whether he probably tried hashish. I think I remember reading, he was smoking some weed and stuff like that. He certainly in the last few years of his life, he was like way doped up on various painkillers and stuff like that, which made him like bedridden. But in terms of his greatest works, I wouldn't be surprised if that's all him, though. Just you can get there. You can get there. It's all through. And what's really fascinating with any of these figures, and any innovations, any genre revolutionizing innovations, it's all incremental steps. You start from point A today, and then tomorrow you go to point B, and then from point C, point D, and then 2 years from now, no one will recognize how the hell you got to point Z, but it's always incremental steps that get you to some kind of like totally different world.
Well, and again, like one of the things I really love about your channel is that you explore the act of creativity through not standard creativity means or methods. A lot of the focus, some of my favorite episodes are about more psychology focused. And I love the Tesla stuff too. So can you kind of explain where for you it starts to expand from just people who create art and expand into more like the psychology of creativity or art or artists?
Yeah, I mean, the overlap there is partially, my own personal passion, which is understanding psychology. When I was in college, Conservatory of Music, studying music composition, I took electives in psychology just because it was also one of my areas of interest. And in the process, anybody who's artistically / esoterically minded, you cross paths with Jung. And in crossing paths with Dr. Carl Jung, you basically see a whole host of answers to a lot of questions that you have as an artist, having to do with your creative process, the idea that you're engaging with the unconscious, the idea that sometimes you'll get an inspiration from a dream and nobody is out there trying to explain what the hell is going on and something like that. But Jung was, and whether you agree with his framework or not, he gave us something incredibly valuable that gives us a lot of food for thought. And so the psychology stuff in the show, in Creative Codex, comes into play mainly because Jung provides a framework for which you can understand what's going on with artists, with spirituality, and it gives you, again, a lot of things to chew on.
So what is your personal take? There are some people who will say art is you're channeling, right? It's not you. You're not the art. You're tapping into something higher, and you're just the medium for which the art comes out. From my personal perspective, I'm a guitar player. That's what my main instrument is. When I'm playing guitar, I get moments where it feels like I'm not in control, but I don't necessarily think that. There's some times where I am actually having to work, and it is me doing that. But what is your kind of take on like where does the art come from? Is it purely a thing that is inside one single person, or is it available to anybody and just by who it comes through will determine what it looks like or how people experience it?
I think it's all of the above. Like, if you want to make the argument that when you're in a flow state, it's a process of channeling, I'm there with you. Anybody who's an artist for a long enough period of time will have moments where you don't recognize what you've created. Like, you're like, well, this wasn't me. I mean, what is this? Where did this come from? I don't know what this means. I mean, there are people who will write a poem, who will make a painting, and it's only after the fact, when enough people have asked them, like, what does that mean? Do they have to now, like, both half invent an answer and half, like, actually kind of start digging around in the back of their mind to figure out why did that come out the way it did? So I'm with you. If you want to go that route, there's something unexplainable going on, and that's part of the magic that remains about it. But then on the other side, it is a craft. All of these mediums that anybody can work in, that can be creative in, they're crafts. And you could say that, in a sense, to practice your craft and become, a master of it, the whole point of that is so you can arrive at a place where you can let the flow happen and not think about the technical things so much. So like, it's hard to go up to an instrument you've never played before and write like a brilliant piece of music. But after you've developed enough craft with it, you're 2 years in, then it's possible, because then you have the mechanics down, you have the norms of the instrument, the norms of music and the style that you're playing in. So you've built up a lot of the foundational knowledge. So I kind of see it that way, like all the knowledge you built up in a craft and a practice, the whole purpose of it is to get you to a place where you're channeling something effectively, either from your unconscious, or you could say from, upper realms or something.
Well, I have talked about this a bunch on the show, but I am a Mason, and I was drawn to Masonry through mostly the art of esoteric texts and mystic traditions. Those are the things, the iconography is what drew me in. And when I became a Mason, I was convinced that it was going to be very, buttoned up and square, and, there isn't going to be much emphasis on creativity. But that really kind of opened my eyes to the Severan liberal arts, like the idea of that. And I was actually very excited when I began to learn more about it and realize that that's like, a pretty crucial piece. And, that's the same type of schooling that existed at certain points on Earth, that doesn't necessarily exist now, at least not in America. And I'm wondering from your perspective, like, is part of doing this show for you, is it that you're trying to, again, push those things out into society? Or is this thing, a buddy of mine who I had on the show had a great way to look at this. Anything on social media is a narcissistic pursuit, right? And you accept that, and it's okay. But is there any level of this that isn't just for what you get out of it, and hopes that other people get something out of it too, or inspires them to be creative? Like, what is the real inspiration to continue doing this?
I mean, that's a big question.
Sure, yeah, and it's like five questions really if we break it up, but just get in where you fit in.
I mean, yeah, riffing off of your earlier point regarding Masonry and this idea that it being like a modern mystery school format, in the ancient times, ancient Greece, and even very likely before, all evidence points that ancient Greece, these types of experiences called mystery schools existed, which were essentially a group of people that gathered together, and they created a functional school that would teach anybody who was initiated into their group essential knowledge and philosophy about the world and life. This included geometry, this included basic philosophy about, how to think and behave, and morality, and then also math. Math was an essential part of early mystery schools and what they were trying to teach. You look at, Pythagoras, and it's like using math as a form of spiritual thought. It's like fascinating and crazy to think about. Yeah, I mean, I've always loved that. I've always thought that that's the way life should be, because there's all these other influences in education, and you throw capitalism in there, and you throw money around, and you start to lose some of the meaning and the soul of what it is to be a human. And when you start putting kids in desks, and you drill them into thinking that they're going from point A to point B by a clock, and you start to realize like all of this was designed around the industrial era to prepare kids for work, for like the child labor force. Like this was this is all under the same umbrella.
Method stuff,
right? And like no daydreaming allowed ever. Like it's just like you start to see the cracks in the veneer of what education is purported to be. Of course, there's positive elements to it. You got to have education, but then once you're out of school, you realize like, okay, I still want something more, and then if you're sensitive to it, I think that's when you become drawn to something like these mystery school traditions, whether it's Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, whether it's the ceremonial magic orders, the more overtly ceremonial magic orders, Thelema or Golden Dawn, and all the other ones out there. And I think that's why we see people still have a curiosity about them, and one could argue a resurgence of interest in them nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were also texting about this yesterday too, but like part of, I was absolutely one of those guys before I joined Masonry where I was like, oh, what are these guys up to? One of my other buddies that I just had on, he was kind of the same way, but like for me, I started interfacing with it and I was like, oh, there's actually a lot in here for me. And for personal reasons purely, which is really what you should be doing it for. I was just really shocked at how much of an emphasis there was on, again, going back to these 7 liberal arts and sciences. You don't understand music unless you understand a little bit of math. And then there's like the whole aspect of that where I started looking into it. I just, gotten a degree in audio engineering, and I started looking at the math of the physics of sound differently.
Oh, it's amazing.
You know what I mean? It became more relevant to me and worth exploring. In school, I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll learn this just to get the good grade. But afterward, it was like, oh, wow, there's actually a lot of really, really interesting meat here. Especially with the way I've always looked at like esoteric teachings as like psychology before psychology.
Yeah, totally.
That might be boiling it down. It might just be one layer of the allegory. But I'm interested if you could kind of speak to like, what are your thoughts on the idea that people like Jung, people like Nietzsche, the modern psychologists were kind of just looking backward and boiling that old information into something that would be ingestible by the modern time that they existed in?
Yeah, I totally, we could riff on that. That's a really fun area of interest. The thing I wanted to mention about schooling and like relating it to things that you're passionate about, or even just reframing it. So like one of the subjects I detested most when I was in school is chemistry. It just felt so rigid and so cold to me. I think that's what it was. And so I always did horrible in it, and I had to try extra hard. And then nowadays, in the last few years, I've become engaged by this practice of alchemy, both studying it and practicing, the physical work. And now I'm like, man, if I could take like a chemistry class in college, that sounds like such a fucking cool idea. Like you can learn so much. And it's just funny. You just reframe it. So in a way, it's like, I think as time goes on, we kind of get these traditions where we lose the soul of something, and it just becomes like when you just boil something down just to the rudiments and just the knowledge itself, like what is the knowledge serving? What is the purpose of this? And I think alchemy addresses some of that where it serves higher purposes. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The area you were talking about was these older traditions. There was no delineation between spirituality, psychology, philosophy, the further back you go. In the Renaissance, there was no clear delineation between science and art. You look at somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, and he was dissecting cadavers to learn about anatomy, which was against the regulations of the church. So if someone found out, reported him, he would be locked up and punished and whatever. But, and of course, then he was also interested in all these things that we would say are only scientific interest, like hydraulics and how flight works and all this stuff. And so, there's really a fusion of these interests and fields the further back you go. And I think there's great benefit to see it that way. But then also overtly, things like Gnosticism, alchemy, and these esoteric practices like Kabbalah, there's really, really clear psychological work and benefits going on when someone engages in those practices. Yeah,
absolutely. I have definitely always kind of felt that was beliefs space a bit more than like the big three religions maybe give credit to. You know, the spiritual portion of it to me is important, regardless of what faith you're following. Like the spiritual importance of life, the spiritual aspect of life is important. At different times in my life, I didn't know necessarily how to define what I felt or what I aligned with, but those two, I think understanding how you interface with that is, even though it doesn't, in modern terms, it's divorced from what we would talk about as psychology or would be considered a psychological disorder. But I don't know. I definitely feel like there is an awareness that you have to have of yourself spiritually, and I don't know which comes first. An awareness of yourself psychologically, analyzing yourself psychologically, or you coming to those psychological conclusions because of however you've reconciled your spiritual beliefs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's hand in hand, right?
It would have to be. And yeah, to your point, that's a really recent thing. It's really in the past 100 years. Before that, they were all intertwined. It was a combined package, and it wasn't until we get into the more materialist aspects of the last 100 or 200 years that we start to like build these borders around the subtopics and be like, there's no interplay at all, there's no connection. Yeah, I mean, so to like play devil's advocate to the benefits of Catholicism, you could say that something like the practice of confession is like going to see a therapist. Sure. This is modeled after the idea that you're getting the weight off your chest for something that maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable telling anybody else because you're ashamed of it, which is what you do partially in therapy. You know, you say things that you hopefully feel comfortable enough telling your therapist that you wouldn't tell anybody else because there's just too many variables. You might hurt somebody's feelings. You're ashamed of it. You got to work through this. You know, it's an issue of yours. So not to say Catholicism is amazing, but there's these elements of all of these traditions where there's psychological benefits around there. So did you, like, on your path to getting interested in these topics, this might be more of a Nietzsche thing, not necessarily a Jungian thing, but did you experience any synchronicities? Like, for me, I feel like just in general with the topics, like the esoteric kind of stuff? Well, like when I was pursuing these things, they were all around me, but my awareness wasn't attuned to it. So it was just fog. It was not something that registered. And once I turned that intent on in my mind, I started realizing it was all around me. I mean, even becoming a Mason, as soon as I started thinking about it, I just started talking about it more. And then I found out, I know Masons. You know, my tattoo artist at the time in Nashville, he was a Mason. He's like, I'll sign your petition. But it wasn't until I was like voicing it, or there was some intent behind it. And I'm just interested, like, I like to ask anyone that gets into these topics because I feel everyone kind of has their own path that unfolds before them. But did you experience any of it? Again, it's like it was around me at all times, and it wasn't until I started vocalizing it. And then once I started vocalizing it, people would be like, oh, you need to talk to this person, or hey, go here and read that book. Was there any of that you experienced in navigating into the murky waters of esoteric traditions? Yeah. Specifically? Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, the more recent ones were tarot related when I was heavily into a series that I did for the show about the tarot on the podcast side of the show. So, I mean, synchronicities, I have multiple ways of noting down, either on my phone, I keep a running list, or in my journal of synchronicities that happen sometimes weekly, sometimes every few days. That. Yeah, no, it's one of my steady practices. I have a lot of different journals, but one of them is for that. And then the idea is that, you start to notice when you're paying attention to them that there's certain patterns to the synchronicities. If it's something that's attached to maybe a point in your life where, I mean, something like being initiated into Freemasonry is a huge major. I feel like it causes something in your depths to stir a little bit, and so
naturally, because of that, those kinds of experiences, whether it's having a child, whether it's starting a new point in your life or turning a new leaf, those kinds of moments where something like, you can imagine a huge monolithic stone just turning and facing another direction, in the sun. Those kinds of moments naturally cause some kind of reaction, I feel like, and in the external world, or you perceive it as a reaction in the external world. And it causes usually a cluster of synchronicities that are located within a few days of each other. So yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, you got to note these things down and pay attention.
I'm terrible at that, but that's amazing. I should start keeping a journal.
Yeah, you'll be amazed, because then you can remember there are some that
there's a log.
Yeah, I have a running list of ones recently that have to do with specifically deer and the stag. And I was, talking to my therapist about it, because he's a Jungian analyst. So he's open to talking for, 45 minutes about just synchronicities. And I can make a list of over a period of 6 months. It happened here, happened here, happened here. And then because of that, I realized something that, the first one happened within a few days of my beloved dog, Bella, dying. And because she died, something happened in me that then caused a chain of, events or compelled my growth. And then that's why this thing with this symbol that I keep seeing everywhere appeared,
I love that. We talked to earlier today about the Jungian analyst. So let's please explore this space if you're willing to. So
yeah, I'm an open book on that. Yeah, sure. Love to.
Explain that situation, why you decided to go that route as opposed to any other route. And does that have anything? Obviously, I'm going to assume that some of it has to do with your interest in Jung. But go ahead. How did you find yourself pursuing that?
So yeah, I mean, I think what happened, if we trace it down a logical route / rabbit hole, is something that Jung describes, wherein he says that around the 35th year of life, something's different. And he describes it as the shadow side of life begins. And he uses another very visual term, the descent toward death. And what he's talking about here is this idea that when we get to a certain point in life, usually mid-30s, late 30s, where life feels a little different, where you either have a midlife crisis, which some people do, and then they kind of whip back into materialism, or you start to pay attention a little more to your inner world, and you start to answer that call, and you start to say, okay, well, what's going on in there? What's this bubbling up of energies that I'm feeling? And so I think it came from that initiative and a few catalyst things happening in the environment. And so that led me down to those paths, basically, of lost the thread where I was going. What was the exact phrasing of the question?
Well, it's just what led you to choosing a Jungian
analyst,
specialist,
right?
As opposed to anyone else,
Well, I felt that I needed to talk about dreams, and of course, there's some experiences and things like that I wanted to discuss, which would apply more to a general therapist also. But I have, now 2 running on 3 dream journals. And there's some stuff in there that I couldn't make, heads or tails about. But sometimes when you get a dream, it feels like it's saying something. Like some of them are just so beautifully composed, like structurally, where it's just like balanced on both ends, and it's saying something, and you're like, what the hell? I need help.
How does this apply to me? Yeah.
I need help figuring this out, and someone hopefully who knows what they're doing, because the way to look at a dream is that it's a snapshot, essentially, of something in your unconscious, something that's shifting, some point of growth, some warning to you about, your behavior in the world. so part of it was the impetus of that, and then also recognizing in myself that I had certain patterns that I didn't want to be transferring to my son, because my son had just been born around the time that within the first few months that I decided, okay, I got to see an analyst. Because what I realized was that, and my wife pointed it out to me, was that I was now replaying a dynamic that I grew up with, which was the father, mother, and the son being in a dynamic. And so I had already had a daughter, and by that point she was 9, 10. But now, because there was a son in the equation, I was feeling and I was noticing certain behaviors coming up that I would associate more with my father. And it was all coming up because this dynamic was presenting itself again. This loop of father, mother, son. And so I was like, okay, I need to see someone who I can speak to, because I don't want to be surprised by what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, that is intense. And I just crossed over the lexicon of 35 and can certainly relate to that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, I'm 37. I had to count that in my mind, but definitely a noticeable shift.
There's no shame in that. 37.
Absolutely. I mean, there are many times where I'm like, I like myself now way better than I've liked myself at any point in my own history.
Oh, nice.
I have the ability and freedom and money to do things that I enjoy. Like by just about every standard of my younger self, I have achieved what I'm trying to achieve. So, I feel like there's definitely a piece in that, and there's the shadow portion of the life is so real. Like there's definitely, at a certain point in my life, I didn't think I'd make it to 25. I thought I would do something dumb and die before then. But then after I crossed 25, I was like, oh, damn, now I have to imagine what life is like beyond this, because I haven't. And then I got to 35, and it's like, I'm still thinking too short-sighted. I need to be thinking about, like, what is between here and when I die, what am I doing?
Right.
But
yeah,
was it just having the son added to your scenario that pushed you over the edge, or were there other things in your life as you crossed that lexicon where you're like, man, I need to get a grip on what's going on in here?
Well, this whole idea of getting into your mid to late 30s. There's a wonderful quote from Jung, of his many, where he wrote this in a letter to someone, where he said, "It's true, life really does begin at 40. Everything up until that point is just research."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful way to see it. And it's, it's a nice way to make yourself feel a little better about growing older.
It's some really tasty copium. Yeah, exactly.
It works, though. It's true. Like me, I'm 40 now. I think I have, yes. Whew, whew. And I think I know a lot more about who I am. And similar to what you're saying, like, I know what I want from life. And I'm starting to, and I think therapy has helped with that, and also a few catalysts in life. I'm starting to really take things more seriously and appreciate the things that really matter, which, is time with family, it's time with best friends, is time with yourself, and, practicing your craft. And money plays a second fiddle to the things that end up really mattering to you. It's nice to have it, though, obviously. But in terms of what else, led me or pushed me toward seeking therapist / an analyst, another thing, and it's something that I've started to understand through therapy, is that there's parts of us in our unconscious that want to grow. You could say we have complexes and we have traumas, but we also have potentials. There's parts of us that want to come out, and they want to exist in our fuller self, but they're kind of like locked in the back just through, our environment, through reinforcement while we were growing up, through just wanting to survive. And so when one of my best friends, who was also named James, when he died suddenly about 5 years ago now. And he left behind a wife and a 7-year-old who were also very close friends of ours. And in the process of the aftermath of his death, which no one expected, he died at 42, that really changed me. That really put into perspective, everything that's at stake. Especially once, you have a family, you have a kid or two, you see what happens when one of the worst things happens that it can, when somebody dies, and but at the same time, obviously grieving my loss of one of my best friends. And so, in the aftermath of that was also one of the things that was a catalyst. Like, okay, time to take my inner world a little more seriously. One, I have to still process this grief years later, and so that's helpful to have a therapist for. But then two, let's get to it. Let's get our hands dirty because there's work to do.
Now, going to see somebody, and this is again just my initial thoughts. Going to somebody who's a Jungian analyst, how does that compare to like regular therapy? Is it the same in every way except the therapist is analyzing things through the Jungian eye, or is the approach to how? Does that make sense? Have you done any other therapy with people who are not Jungian analysts?
Only a grief counselor, who's functioning similarly to a therapist, and I've known people who go to therapy regularly, so I kind of know what it looks like. But in terms of anybody who's a Jungian analyst, they have to get certified through a Jungian institute, like there's one in New York City here in Manhattan, the Jung Institute of New York. And that process requires a few years of learning the way you would for a degree.
Sure.
But the catch is it's not just anybody off the street. You have to already have some kind of certification as a therapist, and ideally already be practicing, and potentially, have already a master's in psychology. They have various requirements for various tracks. And so, the therapist that I see, he's already been working as a regular, psychotherapist, seeing patients that he has a practice in that have nothing to do with Jungian thought. And he could spend the rest of his life just seeing patients in that way. But he's on this track where he needs to get certification for being a Jungian analyst. And so what ends up happening with that is maybe I would say a third to a half of our sessions are what normally happens in therapy, which is talking about your life, talking about, parent issues. Everybody has those. And talking about the stresses of your daily life and things that for whatever reason are causing you tremendous amounts of anxiety out of proportion to what they should be. And usually there's a reason for that. So maybe a third to half of our sessions are that. And then the other part is taken up by, me bringing in my dream journal and me being like, let's just file through this because it feels like there's something going on here with this symbol or with this particular dream. And then we start to, dissect things one by one. It's good to have somebody to sound ideas off of, because the back and forth, you start to again, incremental steps, and then you get to a realization that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what it looks like.
No, it does. And it sounds super interesting. It's not like I've done traditional therapy, and that sounds way more fun. And it also, you kind of quickly pointed to analyzing the symbols of your dreams or the iconography. And there's this thing that I've always kind of thought, mainly relating to esoteric topics, but to human psychology as a whole, is why do all of these ancient sites and books and teachings, why is there so much overlap when it comes to specific iconography? Why have some images kind of been a part of the human experience at every point? And is there some kind of power in an image or a symbol that is beyond just what it presents itself to be? I don't know if any of that is making sense, but Like
yeah.
when I look at all that, there's like a portion of it. It's like these symbols that have been with us at epic moments in our history. Like, did those images shape that time? Did the images shape our psychology? And certainly human psychology has now a history with those images, and they mean certain things. Kind of the point of what I'm getting to here is like a lot of people get a little spooked out by the esoteric stuff. They start seeing some of those images in that context and they're scared. But then those images also exist in like the most placid, Judeo-Christian context. And it's not scary then, but it's scary for them when they're looking into that. So I'm just kind of like wondering if you can maybe expand on your thoughts into the importance of symbols or symbolism and how that actually does connect to our psychology in whatever way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, symbols are one of the things that drew me into these kinds of esoteric traditions, including something like Freemasonry and all of the other ones. I mean, you look at a chart of alchemical symbols, and these things go on for miles of like, it's just like, how did they come up with this? Triangle combining with the cross, combining with, all the various symbols for the substances you use. So as an artist, as initially a visual thinker, you're definitely drawn into these traditions because of that. And that's why I'm not surprised that one of your tattoo artists was a Mason. And I feel that that would probably be true for a majority or a larger than average portion of tattoo artists translating as Masons also.
Sure, yeah.
Because of the way one is drawn in through just seeing symbols used effectively. So like, Jung, when he described the archetypes, he often uses this term images. And I think there's something poetic in that description of archetypes, because a lot of times we do see them visually represented. And when we think of an archetype, usually an image comes into our mind. So if you think of something like the archetype for mother, just the idea of mother, the great mother, or the mother who is, the goddess of all. And usually you immediately have an image reference in your mind. And so this idea of the archetypes and symbols, there's definitely overlap there that causes a lot of interesting association. But I think what we see with symbols that are in esoteric traditions is we often see archetypal things being described by the symbols. Like if you see the symbol for yin and yang, the yin yang symbol, that's describing essentially duality in a visual form. Duality is an archetypal idea, the idea that everything has an opposite. You have light and dark, you have good and evil, and so up and down. What's interesting is that when you look at symbols that aren't traditionally seen as being like esoteric, let's say, if you think about them long enough, you see them as such. So like, let's say a cross, Jesus's cross he was crucified on, often people will just wear it as just the symbol of the cross itself. Well, you could see that as also a symbol for duality, because it's a horizontal line and a vertical line. It's two lines that are completely opposite of one another. You have a horizontal axis. You could say that perhaps represents time, and then the vertical axis represents space. And the figure of Jesus is this kind of ultimate manifestation of what someone can reach in the heights of their potential, crucified or sacrificed on this duality of time and space. So there's a lot. I think a lot of those kinds of symbols to, the Masonic square and compass and all that stuff have archetypal roots in those meanings,
Yeah, I would completely agree, and it's one of my favorite aspects of looking into these topics is like understanding that there's probably many layers of interpretation, each with its own significance. Like there's a meta level of that I just love. I can always learn more.
Yeah, totally.
You know,
the rabbit hole always goes deeper.
It goes deeper and deeper. Like, you know, the one that would always treat me out is like the 5-point star. Like the 5-point star. It's all over the world. It's on ancient sites. But if you look at it in the context of like pagan traditions or like, you know, it gets lumped in with satanic imagery, but it's like that's also a Christian symbol. Like there's a thing that is important to both of these things that is encompassed in this image, and that's why they use it. You know, I don't know. I'm not saying I've made any sense of it, but I've always wondered, like, you know, is that iconography, because it's so widely used, is it influencing our psychology, or did it already influence our psychology and we just use it because it brings us back to this point of comfort or human connection? I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to this idea that much of human experience, you know, life, death, birth, feeling of love, hate, much of human experience can be boiled down to archetypal things. And when you start to create symbols that try to capture that, then no matter what continent or ethnicity or, you know, culture you live in, it's inevitable that you're going to grab similar aspects of the world around you to create those symbols, I think, because no matter what culture you live in, we live on the same world that, you know, we look up at the same stars, we look up
We're humans.
at the same sun and moon, which, oh my God, I mean, how lucky are we to have a sun and moon that are the perfect representations of consciousness and unconsciousness? Like, what would we do? What would all these esoteric traditions do if we didn't have a sun and moon to represent that? Like almost every tradition in some fashion uses, you know, those two very powerful symbols.
Yeah, this is why I love it. This is why I love it, because, you know, everyone will be quick to dog on how primitive ancient cultures were, but the more I've read into the history of these ideas, the more I found that, like, basically the only culture that doesn't really get it is us. We're the ones that don't understand it. The other guys understood it and were able to do stuff that we couldn't do today. So, you know, who's really at fault here? I don't know if you're familiar with Ike Baker. I've had him a bunch on the show, and he really drives home like the materialist world thing. This modern idea that things have to be compartmentalized into their corporeal pieces, and we can only look at it like that, and we can't necessarily zoom out and look at what this whole thing looks like holistically. And it's just always funny to me, like how we, you know, even with science, like modern science, there's so much modern science that I'm pretty sure they were aware of back then, and they kind of talk about it not in the refined sense that we have it now, which kind of brings me to the next question, alchemy. So I've known a bunch of people who are into alchemy in various degrees, very few people who are practical alchemists. So could you kind of explain, and that's like, for people who aren't familiar with these things, there's like a pipeline to that. You get into these ideas and ultimately you come across alchemy, and either you're lucky to have somebody close by who can inform you on them, or you just kind of look on from the outside. I've only really looked in from the outside. It's not that I'm not into physically doing it. It's just I'm of the mindset that I would let smarter people than me do that. But if you could kind of explain how you found yourself into it, and what has exploring that space tangibly been like?
Yeah, man. I mean, saying that, you know, you're letting smarter people than you do it. I mean, one, you're doing yourself a disservice, but two, you might be right, because because like I was practicing alchemy in this room when I was first starting it, and I probably could have killed myself in here. because of just the sheer level of smoke that my first alchemical procedure created.
Gotcha.
I was trying to calcinate this pulverized lemon balm plant. It was dried lemon balm that you take a mortar pestle yourself and you pulverize it into ash, essentially. And then the process of calcinating it, you're supposed to get it to the nigredo stage where it's black, and then you keep calcinating it, which is just heating it while it's in a vessel like a pot. And then you're supposed to get it to a white ash stage, which would be the albedo. But in the process of even just getting it to the black ash stage, I tried to follow, the instructions of this treatise I was reading to a T, and I think I did a pretty good job. But I kind of overlooked the when it was more of a modern treatise, and it said, like, make sure that you have like a vent installed somewhere above where you're doing these procedures so that it can, get the air
Circulate.
out.
Yeah.
Circulate. See, I wasn't paying enough attention in chemistry class, clearly. And so it started smoking, and it wasn't like that it was on fire. It was just a process of heating it. And the smoke just filled up this room like crazy, to the point I was like, oh God, let me open this window. And that wasn't enough. Let me open the second window. Let me put a fan in front of the window. To the point where I was just panicking because the room was so filled with smoke. It looked like my house was on fire from the outside. I was like, someone's going to call 911. And the house smelled for days. So there's something to be said for, you got to be careful and got to be smart with this stuff.
Yeah, you're really making me feel good about my decision, because I would certainly burn my house down, I'm sure. And my wife doesn't really even like the smell of Nag Champa, so I could only imagine how pissed off. She's also hyper allergic to most things that are plants. It's wow. Very dangerous. So
yeah.
But it's always interested me, and it's again something that I am not necessarily going to try doing, but I'm super interested in the people that do it. How did you get there? Like, what was the trajectory into alchemy?
Well, it turns out the simple solution to this issue of smoke filling your home and you killing yourself is to just do the operation outside, which was something I found out from a friend who's an alchemist. And when he said, I just do the first stage, calcination, to get to nigredo outside. I'm like, gotcha. That's a great idea.
That tracks. Yeah.
Because you just get a portable burner, and you can get these pretty cheaply these days, and you just put, one of these gas canisters into it. And so then later, when I was doing the stages again, I did them outside. I know it was a wonderful experience, no stress, no fear. And it was much, much more conducive to like being able to reflect and take the moment in. But the way I got there was because I'd always been fascinated by the tradition, specifically the visual art, these alchemical woodcuts, just beautiful works of art. These days, just looking at it cold without knowing what it is, you'd say like this is a surrealist illustration. And so I was doing this series for Creative Codex on the podcast side about Jung and his obsession with alchemy. And so this was a multi-part series. I got to like episode 4. I've been working on this for months. And I got to a point where...
These are the... Sorry to interrupt,
alchemical woodcuts. Yeah, totally.
Gotcha.
They're beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That is super cool.
Look up Splendor Solis also, if you are able to put stuff on the screen. Just the imagery from that is all in full color and beautifully hand-painted.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is super cool.
So as I was working on this series, I got to what would essentially be the 4th episode, and I was listening to other shows and podcasts that were also talking about alchemy, and a lot of them took it from the perspective and approach of psychological alchemy and, these modern applications of the different steps. But then I was like, I don't know, none of these people have ever put anything into a pot and like boiled it or, calcinated it. So who am I also to speak about alchemy at length for hours and hours and hours if I've never actually done any of the work and never put anything into the alembic and seen what happens. And so I was like, okay.
Here we go.
I don't want to be disingenuous. Far from, that's the last thing I want to do. So there's this treatise that I knew about for a long time because there's this French esotericist, Jean Dubuis. He was a Martinist, an alchemist, and he made a number of incredible treatises about kind of esoteric spirituality, and he made them all freely available online. If you look up Jean, Jean, it's French, and then Dubuis, Dubuis, they're still freely available on his website. And so the idea was that he created multiple treatises on alchemy that are very clear, very direct approaches to practicing, physical alchemy, practical alchemy, as it's called. And so I was like, okay, let me try this. And I never thought that I would. But in the process of engaging with it, even the initial first lesson, second lesson, it was remarkable how much of an effect it had on my psychology, like immediately, like unexpected things. I would have intense, vivid dreams that were very alchemical, dreams about seeing matter and liquids in pots and being able to kind of like see the molecule level of them and see them transform. To this day, I still sometimes have dreams regarding like transformation of liquids and things like this. But it did something to me. It really did. And it meant a lot to me to pursue that. And when I have time, I still do it. But that's really how I fell into it, is because I didn't want to feel like I was being disingenuous by talking so much about something and never having tried it.
I love that. That's great. And again, there's like, at least with alchemy, there's always been in my mind, like the greats didn't know it either. Like they were just figuring it out. The people who we would think were like the guys who were the tippy top of that train of thought back in the day, way back in the day, they were also experimenting. They're like true pioneers in that sense. They were practicing science when that would normally get you burned at the stake.
Yeah, true. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so I have way too many things to talk about with alchemy, but I will say this one reflection that is worth thinking about. So right from the first lesson, when you're preparing the lemon balm in this treatise by Jean Dubuis, called Spagyric, Volume 1, Spagyric is working with plants. Right from the get-go, you're supposed to pay attention to the moon phases, because you're not supposed to work with lemon balm until the first Thursday of a month where the moon is I believe, a waning gibbous moon. And so it was a very specific, obviously. I had never paid attention to moon phases. I mean, the moon just went up and down in the sky, and as far as I was concerned, it was just a cool looking, occasional art project to include in pictures. But then I'm doing this, and then I look and I'm like, oh, am I gonna wait? Should I? When is the next Thursday? And when is the next waning gibbous moon? And then I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And then in the process of doing that, I walk my dog at night, and then I'm looking up at the moon. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's a waxing gibbous. Okay, so I got to wait a little while. And then to this day, I love looking at the moon, and now I actually understand the phases.
Yeah.
And the other thing that starts to happen when you're doing physical work, that it's ritualistic, it's very ritualistic in alchemy, with the spiritual intent that is mirrored in conjunction to the bodies of, the celestial movements above you, you start to feel like you're in tune with the universe. Whether you believe in this stuff or not, it has that effect on you, which is what's remarkable and profound, because you start to see like, oh, there's Jupiter in the sky, and the moon is changing to this phase right now, and I have this matter in a vial at home that's currently distilling, and you start to feel like you're an agent of change in the world and in the universe, and that's one of the kind of parts about this kind of tradition that nobody ever mentions, that it really has a profound positive effect on like your well-being.
Well, and two, it's like you're another one of those things. You're just saying, you see the moon all the time. You don't really think anything of it. But once you've turned on your awareness, now you're paying attention to those things. And you're seeing correlations with what is happening in the sky with what is happening on Earth. And it's, unavoidable. I've had a number of people come on to talk about that specific aspect of esoteric traditions, just monitoring space, the movement of the heavenly bodies. And my question there for you is like, what do you think it is? Like from like the logical part of my brain, it's like, oh, we're going to wait for certain moon phases, or we're going to wait for planets to be in certain conjunctions because of magnetism. Like there's some magnetic, like a tangible, measurable, scientific magnetic thing that is aiding me in the process. But I also understand enough about these topics to be, the moon could also just have been a more spiritual, like the heavens are aligned in a way that is conducive for you to be doing this thing at this specific time. I'm wondering if you could kind of like speak to that a little bit. Like, what do you think it is?
No, yes, that's a fantastic question. I certainly have no authority to give an answer, but I'll try. I think the essential ingredient in all of this stuff having to do with correspondences and seeing the universe in this way is consciousness. Like that is the essential ingredient that makes any of it work or make sense. So when you're doing this kind of work, engaged in any kind of esoteric practice, tradition, that's ritualistic, in ceremonial magic, let's say, or traditional magical folk traditions like the African ones, or what you end up engaging with is a large, rich tapestry of correspondences. And in the process, I think what's happening is your consciousness is fusing and interfacing with reality in some fashion that we don't understand, and that is definitely producing results. Because what you end up doing, and the reason why it's very important to journal in any of these practices, is you're recognizing the effects and the ripples that are happening in reality in relation to the work you're doing. And so that's what I would say to that there's something going on. And I think the essential ingredient is consciousness and just your engagement, your willful engagement with the world around you.
Yeah, I love that. And again, there was no right answer to that. I'm interested in your opinion there.
What's your answer?
Well, again, like there's the pragmatic, logical side of my mind where it's like, well, it's magnetism. Like there's because the moon is here and these planets are here and stars are here, there's a certain magnetic force that makes doing that, whatever it is, ceremony, alchemy, it's most conducive for that. It's the situation is right for that to be most effective. But then there's like the spiritual component of me that's like, you start paying attention to these things and it's not like you're connected. You are connected. You start paying attention to that stuff and you just start to change your life around it. And that's what the ancients did. People were doing this for we only stopped doing it recently. It's a thing that, predating modern culture, every culture had a form of it. Yes. And it really revolved around the awareness of what was happening in the sky, and that what was happening up there was manifest on Earth as well. And alchemy was kind of this weird bridge of combining the two planes. So, and again, I don't think I'm right. I just like when I look at that from the two halves of my brain, I could see it and believe both to be more or less true, depending on which side of my brain is dominating that thought.
If that makes sense. I totally, I'm on board with you. So, like as an example, I have this journal that's yet another separate journal that I was only keeping for an esoteric practice I was doing. Was written by the same figure, Jean Dubuis, and it's called Fundamentals of Esoteric Wisdom, I think that I'm pretty sure that's the name, Fundamentals of Esoteric Wisdom, that he has on his site. So in the process, you're engaging with these experiences in front of a mirror, and this is traditionally called mirror scrying, and you're doing it late at night. And eventually what starts to happen is there's like these weird shifts in your consciousness that are very noticeable and very unexpected and very strange, where in terms of like layman's explanations, you could say like you're entering a dream state with your eyes open, let's say, through this kind of ritualistic process. And then you start to see things appearing in front of you, overlaid on your vision. And that's when, you're like, okay, this is, we're not in Kansas anymore. And so you finish the session, you write down what happened. Now, one thing that, practicing magic teaches you is to really pay attention to the environment around you, even when you're not, doing anything like a ritual. And so what I noted down in those journals is that an effect that I still can't explain, but that before and after one of these sessions, synchronicities would happen in the length of 2 to 3 days around the session. Not only after, but before. And I would notice this because sometimes I would take a break for a month. And then I'd be like, I feel I need to do a session at the end of the week. We'll do it on Friday. In the process of getting to the session, synchronicities would start to happen. I'd do the session. It was a good session. I'd write down everything I can. I'd write down what I saw and draw some of it. And then the synchronicities would continue for 2 or 3 days and then taper off. And then it would be back to normal. I'm like, what is this? How do you make 2 cents out of that? Synchronicities start to happen before the session as if the ripple is going, against the flow of time in reversed, and also after. So something's happening with consciousness. That's the only explanation I have.
Well, okay, so this is a perfect bridge. So there are many areas of emerging science that are kind of calling back to, again, stuff that was written about and clearly understood to some extent a very long time ago. One of those things is, of course, the quantum theory, right? The idea that at some kind of atomic level, the observation of that atom can change the behavior of the atom, right? And this is all stuff that is well over my pay grade, but it sounds very similar to things that have been talked about, and just the general idea that it's seriously being discussed in a modern scientific context, that our brains could have some influence on tangible reality. Again, we like to think we're this divorced being, and this is something I've gone on a million tirades here. We only interact with like the slimmest portion of the information that's freely around us. Like if we could see sound, it would be like we were underwater. If we could see microwaves, if we could see radio waves, it would be like we're underwater. And thinking that we are these divorced entities from all of that is silly. Of course we're interacting with all of it. It's interacting with us. There is some kind of layer of connection beyond whatever our senses have limited the bandwidth that we interact with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
The idea that you have the intent. I've also started to look at the concept of intent very differently in the past couple years. Yeah. There is a power to that. I used to try and chase the scenarios where synchronicities would occur, and I would find that the more I tried to enforce synchronicities to occur, the less they would happen, or the less significant they would be. But the less I tried to influence it and just focused on the intent, just having a good intent, not like a super selfish, I need it to be this way kind of idea about something. And again, it's not saying I can will it into existence, but I will start to notice things converge around conspiring to make that happen, whether that's all just me, like because I have the intent, my will is being enforced. I don't think I'm that powerful. I think there's also some kind of layer to the interconnectedness on a much deeper level that we have to the physical space around us. One once you have the intent, things start to form, whether it's you doing it or whether it's the universe aligning around the intent. Like you're collapsing the wave function, you're creating this reality, and you're watching it kind of like materialize. Very heady, very heady, I know, but
no, I'm with you.
We're just
there.
interested.
We're there, brother.
Beautiful, love that. So I'm just kind of interested in like your thoughts. Let me also just say this really quick. So I had this guy on the show. His name's Sterling Cooley. And what Sterling Cooley is doing is he's taking ultrasound and he's stimulating his vagus nerve. And he's also looking at the effects of ultrasound on microtubules, which are the things that are inside neurons. And what his science, I thought that was some hippie stuff. But I talked to one of my other buddies who's an MRI scientist, a doctorate MRI scientist, and he's like, no, that's actually really real. In a real scientific context, they're looking into, can I stimulate neurons with ultrasound, these microtubules in the neurons, and what effects that has on consciousness or your perception of reality. That is actually being seriously debated in scientific circles right now. I've also had a number of guests on who have talked about or documented, or they themselves have practiced using sound to like benefit the body's natural processes and like kind of triggering responses in the brain by stimulating it with specific sounds or combinations of sounds. And I'm interested if you've looked into any, basically the simplified version of this question is, where do you see the parts of emergent science or cutting edge science converging with a lot of these concepts that the ancients clearly understood to a certain degree?
I remember I watched that Vagus Nerve episode of yours. I really enjoyed it when we first started chatting, and I looked up some things about it, and I found a study that says that you can stimulate the vagus nerve with humming and chanting. And they specifically did it using the syllable Om. And then you're like, oh, okay, so, it's something that Buddhists have been doing for millennia.
For thousands of years, yeah.
It's like, oh, that's nice, we just discovered it again. It's just funny, it's, you can't help but think that you got to respect these esoteric traditions, because these people, what happens when you seclude yourself and you start to engage with the world in a meaningful and deliberate way, you start to somehow gain knowledge about it, whether it's through your own intuition, whether it's through some kind of altered state. I mean, people on ayahuasca, they say that the plant talks to them. Sure. They say that they, understand nature and the world, and can, the plant can tell them things. So whether it's through an altered state, or whether it's through, which can also be reached through meditation, or just through trial and error, because you don't have an iPhone distracting you half the day, and you have chosen to be an ascetic. And so that's what you do. And in the process of sitting by yourself, and gazing at the sunlight, you start to understand, the fabric of life. I mean, it's, I think it's just, I'm sure you find it also, it's endlessly entertaining to see those kinds of studies that confirm these kinds of things that are common knowledge among esoterics.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's getting kind of silly. Now, my buddy who's an MRI scientist, he's not into the esoteric stuff at all, but he's a very high level thinker. Actually, he and I took like Psychology 101. So he and I have been having these debates for a very long time. And I've always appreciated his perspective, because he comes from like literally a clinical, medical, materialist worldview of how this stuff operates.
Right.
But in the past couple of years in our conversations, he and I have been finding way more overlap with just, again, it's like, they didn't have the types of technology that we have now. So they couldn't necessarily do what we do now on this scale. Right. But when you look at ancient sites that are built with certain dimensions, and anything with shape and form has resonance. The math there is super easy. It becomes super simple to understand. Om wasn't just a fun thing they were saying. They were like using it. It was inducing a state of consciousness. It was inducing something, a chemical process in their body. They were, just performing a shortcut. And the same thing with the practice of using psychedelics. Any culture that used or many cultures that use psychedelics as like a normal rite of passage or a part of their, just a part of their culture's process, would always say, yes, this lets us communicate with nature. This breaks down the barrier, right. And now we can communicate with nature. That's how they would use it. That's it. For us, it's just like, yeah, let's go do ayahuasca, man. But for a culture that isn't trying to exploit it that way, they're like, no. This is we do this for guidance, for specific guidance, and it connects us in this very special and unique way. So I guess we've talked a lot about the idea of using these ideas or pursuing these topics as a way to kind of shift your consciousness and shift your thinking. What do you think are the most valuable things that any person could start doing to increase that awareness, practice that awareness, and refine that awareness to something that benefits them?
Whoa, okay.
It's heavy. Yeah, it's a real heavy one.
So the awareness about, you mean like having an open mind about esoteric traditions, or about like a way of viewing the world, or what specifically do you refer to?
Well, like a lot of, like, again, one of the reasons I love your content is you tie a lot of seemingly unrelated stuff together in this really beautiful way. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to the way that exploring your own psychology, not even necessarily the people that you personally enjoy, but exploring your own psychology. What are some things that people can do to open their own awareness to what's going on, not only in their head, but the world around them in a deeper, more meaningful way?
Yeah. I mean, I'm all about that. I have on my YouTube channel, I have two guided meditations, but on my podcast, I have several, and one of them, I really love. It's very simple. On my podcast feed for Creative Codex, there's a guided meditation. It's called Guided Meditation, Discover Your Heart. And I guide you through a way to first relax your body by laying down or sitting, and little by little, you relax each limb, every muscle, and the point is to reach such a profound state of stillness, which you can reach within 15 minutes generally if you're not moving and, you're making sure there's no tension. Such a profound point of stillness that you not only feel your heart beating in your chest, but you also feel blood rushing through various parts of your body. And so it's something that you can do. It's really basic, and it somehow like grounds you in your body. Like it makes you feel like, okay, I'm living in the present, and I'm part of this vessel. And this, when you're that still, you end up with each heartbeat, you feel like this in your skull. And it feels like, you could imagine it kind of like a tree, like tree roots, like filling with liquid percussively. And when you start to do stuff like that, I think you start to shift a little bit away from the purely materialistic lens of engaging with physical objects and people to being like, okay, well, what else is happening there inside? What else is happening inside of me? What else is happening in my body? Even something as simple as this, when you go to the bathroom, I'm guilty of this too, but I try to, half the time, put my phone down. Yeah, you're uncomfortable, you're taking a shit, you're sitting on the toilet. Put your phone down. Don't check Instagram. Don't do another Duolingo, exercise. Just sit there. And you'll notice every other time some kind of insight comes into your mind. Maybe it's something that you were thinking about somebody else, or a relationship, or a hardship you've been having, or a problem at work, and there's something about just sitting on the toilet in your complete shame that it's going to draw something out of the back of your mind. Maybe it's the physical act that you're doing. I don't know, but it's similar to taking a shower, let's say. But
Sure.
Let yourself be a little uncomfortable in those kinds of moments, or let your brain have some space, I would say, right? Because it will reward you with stuff, and you'll be able to be living a little more in the present moment. There's a wonderful tradition that you see in ancient Japan. A lot of haikus would be written on the bathroom wall and then transferred to paper. And the idea is that they would be sitting there, they'd be on the toilet. And something about being in the present, in that moment, being by yourself, it kind of lets things come out from your brain, not the rest of you.
Well, other places too, but yeah, sure. The flow is strong. Yeah.
Yes. So as potentially cringy as that is, just take that as a personal challenge and see what happens. Maybe not the first time, but I guarantee you by the second time, your brain is going to reward you with something. Put your phone
literally in the pose of the thinker. You know,
yeah.
Michelangelo's The Thinker.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
We're kind of reaching the hour and a half mark. I know we're going to try and wrap up here by 3, so I just want to make sure I get to these last 2 questions. The first one is, of all the people that you've done videos on, of all the research that you've done, what do you think is the most valuable lesson that any of them taught you, or that you learned in the process of learning more about them?
Whew. Okay. I mean, there's definitely lessons about every one of these figures. Because whenever I do one of these series about a creative genius, let's say like a Vincent van Gogh or Emily Dickinson, or even Robert Johnson, the blues guitarist and singer, I really dedicate a lot of time, labor, and research to it. You know, I'm not like looking at Wikipedia and ChatGPT. I buy books, I spend the money, and I get a pen, and I destroy a book in the process by underlining and writing notes in it and stuff. And so I really internalize something about them, and then hopefully in that process I'm able to get something valuable for myself, but also to put out something that is a portrait of them in a sense for the episodes. So one thing, let's say, there's something for everybody that I've covered, but let's say Vincent van Gogh. He was a man who spent decades of his life kind of meandering about without direction. He kind of had one job as he worked in a gallery, and then he got fired, and then he tried to be a Christian monk, and then they fired him from that because he was too charitable. He actually would give homeless people, he would let them sleep in the rooms that were allotted only to him and other monks, and he would go sleep in the barn and such. So there's this guy, let's say Vincent van Gogh, who was wandering around in life a little aimlessly, and then his brother is an art seller, an art dealer, and his brother sees this and he says, well, I'll do you a kindness. How about I give you money so that you can, live, eat, and have supplies. And why don't you pursue painting? Because you've always been good at art. Maybe you can paint, and maybe I'll sell your paintings eventually or something. And Van Gogh's like, yeah, okay, let's try this. So suddenly, out of nowhere, and over the course of the next 10 years, Van Gogh paints 900 paintings. Like they explode out of him. And this is after he's already in his late 20s, effectively had never really touched a brush. He'd only been drawing, illustrating and stuff. And so this idea that inside each of us, there's these hidden potentials that some people just die without ever having realized or discovered or even known exist. And whether those potentials are like a latent talent, like in the case of Vincent van Gogh, or whether they're just like the potentials for growth, the potentials for, being a better person, living a more meaningful life, the potential for transformation. It's all there. And all it takes is just taking a chance on yourself and just listening a little bit and respecting what's going on in there.
I love that. And you beat me to my next question, which was going to be words of advice for people who might be struggling or on the fence about pursuing something creative. But that kind of sums that up quite perfectly. So I guess I'll replace that question because you did such a good job of laying that out. And what upcoming stuff are you working on? What topics are we going to get to see some episodes about?
Yeah. I'm always excited, about the next thing. But right now I'm finishing up, going to do a third episode on this incredible artist and very spiritual thinker, Hilma of Klint. So that's on the main podcast. I'm going to be up to the third episode now on that. She's a fascinating figure. She was involved in spiritualist circles and influenced by Rosicrucianism. And so you see it in her paintings. She basically was trying to capture the spirit world and represent it on the canvas. And so she was part of a group called The Five, which was 5 women who would get together and hold seances. And in the process, they would start to receive imagery from these spirits and higher beings. And so her paintings end up being the physical representation of these things that they, saw and experienced in these seances. Yeah, super cool, super fascinating figure. And also, it ends up being that her work is now considered one of the first examples of abstract painting that predates all the big male artists who dominated those fields in the early 1900s. But of course, she never got her due. So fascinating figure. And then, of course, more stuff with Jung. I just put out a second video having to do with this idea of midlife crisis and the way that Jung viewed it as a call from your soul toward a life of greater meaning. And I'm gonna put out another one probably within a month or so on the YouTube side of Creative Codex, talking more about archetypes and exploring that.
Beautiful. Well, I'm going to have all of those links in the description below. If you're into these topics, there's something for everybody. You cover such a wide breadth of specific topics, but you find so many cool ways to kind of tie them all together.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Again, they are all related. It's not as separated as we've been led to believe, at least in the past couple hundred years. So, I love your content. I hope if anyone liked any portion of this conversation, definitely check out Creative Codex on podcast form or YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This was super fun. Hopefully we can have you back on in the future and explore something more specifically, but this was super fun.
Absolutely. I had a blast. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Amazing. All right, folks, this has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. See y'all.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Klint and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.